In the summer of 1997, the air was thick with heat and the scent of sawdust as Tom Mitchell, a quiet and skilled handyman known around town for his steady hands and unassuming nature, vanished without a trace while working on the restoration of the old Victorian house on Maple Street. I remember hearing about it then, how he was last seen unloading tools in the morning and then simply disappeared sometime before dusk. His family was frantic, holding vigils in that same creaky house. But the police found nothing, no clues, no signs of struggle, just an empty space where Tom had been. The community whispered theories ranging from accidents hidden by negligence to more sinister possibilities no one dared speak aloud. That house, once a proud relic of better days, became a hushed monument to mystery and loss, its boarded windows and peeling paint standing as a testament to the unanswered questions that plagued everyone who knew Tom. For years after, no one dared enter the property, not out of superstition alone, but because it seemed to carry a weight too heavy for anyone to bear, the weight of a vanished man, and the silence he left behind. I often wondered what it was like to be inside that house, alone, with nothing but shadows and whispers for company. The rumors grew, twisting and turning through the town like the tangled vines climbing the house's faded walls. Some said Tom had found something during the renovation that should have never been uncovered. Others believed he was taken by forces beyond human understanding, a victim of something dark and deliberate. Every now and then, I caught myself imagining Tom's last moments, standing in a dimly lit room, hearing footsteps that weren't his own, a presence cold and unforgiving closing in. The police files were cold and thin, a reflection of a case that had stalled and slipped away with time. Yet, despite the silence from official channels, the ache in Tom's family never faded. I met his sister once, years later, her eyes still searching the horizon for a brother who never came home. She told me how they kept his room exactly as it was, a shrine to a life abruptly stolen. That old house became a place no one spoke about without lowering their voices. Every passing year layered more dust on the forgotten furniture and more secrets in the empty halls. When I walk past the boarded-up windows, I sometimes feel the house watching me back, holding tight to its story, waiting for someone brave enough to turn the key and see what has been hidden in the dark all these years. Tom Mitchell was never just a missing man. He became the heart of a haunting mystery, a silent witness trapped between the walls of that old Victorian home, and for all I know, still waiting for someone to find him. In 2024, when Mark and I finally got the keys to the old Mitchell house on Maple Street, it felt like the start of a new chapter, one full of promise and the kind of hope that only comes with fresh beginnings. The moment we stepped through the creaking front door, dust swirling in shafts of late afternoon light, I could almost see the ghosts of its past, hidden beneath layers of peeling wallpaper and decades of silence. The neighbors had their stories, of course, whispers about Tom Mitchell's disappearance that floated like shadows around the neighborhood. At first, we shrugged it off as the kind of small-town legend that clings to old houses like ivy, a tale told over kitchen tables and on porches to fill quiet evenings. "Don't worry," Mark said with his usual grin. "We're here to fix it up, not dig into old ghosts." We threw ourselves into the work, peeling back the years with every swing of the hammer, the scraping of old paint, revealing glimpses of what had once been. The house was a skeleton wrapped in faded memories, creaking under our feet and groaning like it was telling us to be careful. There was a strange charm to the way the floors sank ever so slightly beneath us, and the way the windows framed the sunlight like dusty portraits of the past. We found old tools scattered in forgotten corners, rusty nails and bent screws telling stories of hands that had built and rebuilt these walls. Sometimes, late at night, when the house settled and the wind whispered through the cracks, I felt an unshakable chill, like the house was alive in ways we couldn't see. Mark dismissed it as the sounds of an old building adjusting, but I knew better. The basement was a particular enigma. It was colder down there, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and aged wood. When Mark first found the heavy boiler tucked away behind a curtain of shadows, I thought it was just another relic of the house's history. But when he mentioned a padlocked door hidden behind it, my stomach twisted with unease I couldn't explain. We looked for the key, searching through drawers and dusty boxes, but it was nowhere to be found. That door became a silent question, a knot in the fabric of our new home that refused to unravel. I tried not to let my imagination run wild, but sometimes I caught myself wondering what was behind it, what secrets the house had kept hidden for so long. Friends told us to be careful, reminded us of the rumors surrounding the house, but we brushed them aside, convinced that the past was just that, past. Yet, every creak and groan in the night seemed to whisper otherwise. The neighborhood looked different from 27 years ago, of course. Trees had grown tall, streets were repaved, and faces changed. But the house stood stubbornly rooted in time, a monument to memories that refused to fade. As the days slipped by and the renovations peeled away layers of dust and decay, I couldn't help but feel that we were stepping into a story far bigger than ourselves, one that might not want to be told. Still, we pressed on with hope and hammer in hand, unaware that beneath our feet, behind that locked door, a past was waiting patiently to be uncovered. The basement was always the part of the house that drew me in and filled me with a restless kind of unease, like stepping into a forgotten chapter of a book you're not sure you want to finish reading. One afternoon, while Mark was down there sorting through piles of rusted tools and brittle wooden crates, he stumbled upon the large, ancient boiler tucked into a corner where shadows clung like cobwebs. Its surface was cracked and peeling, layers of faded paint flaking away to reveal dark metal scarred by years of neglect. Behind the boiler, something caught his eye. A heavy door set low into the stone wall, with an iron padlock that looked like it had not been disturbed in decades. The lock itself was thick and rusted, its chain wrapped tightly around the door's cold hinges, holding whatever lay behind it prisoner in silence. We searched everywhere for the key, rifling through drawers, flipping over dusty boxes, and asking around the neighborhood if anyone might have a clue, but every lead ended in dead ends. The air around that door was different, damp and thick, with a chill that seemed to seep into my bones every time I stepped near it. It wasn't just the coldness of the basement or the stale scent of old stone and rust. It felt heavier, like the house was holding its breath, guarding its secrets jealously. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling or my imagination running wild after so many late nights working in the dark, but there was something else, something intangible that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Sometimes I would find myself lingering just a moment too long by that door, compelled by a mixture of dread and curiosity that gnawed at my insides. Mark was practical and steady, insisting the lock was just a relic of old construction practices, probably meant to keep the boiler room safe from accidents. But I could see the unease in his eyes, the way he hesitated when he looked at it, the slight pause before turning away. The house itself seemed to whisper in the quiet moments, its creaks and groans echoing like faint voices through the rafters, and the locked door was at the heart of it all. That room behind the boiler was a mystery wrapped in layers of dust and time, and as much as I wanted to ignore it, I knew it was only a matter of time before the house demanded its story be told. On cold evenings, when the wind pressed against the windows and the house shivered with unseen memories, I would catch myself standing in the basement, staring at that locked door as if willing it to open, to reveal the truth buried in the dark. Each day, the weight of the unknown pressed down a little harder, settling into my chest like a stone I could not dislodge. And yet, beneath the fear was a strange kind of hope, that behind that lock was something waiting for us, something that might finally explain the shadows hanging over this house and the mystery of Tom Mitchell's disappearance all those years ago. After the unsettling discovery of the locked door behind the boiler, I found myself consumed by a need to understand the house's history and the man whose fate was tangled with its walls, Tom Mitchell. I spent hours at the local library, flipping through brittle newspaper clippings and faded property records, tracing every detail I could find about the house and the mysterious handyman who vanished so many years ago. Tom's name appeared in articles that painted him as a skilled craftsman, meticulous in his work but reserved in his dealings, a man who preferred the quiet company of his tools over people. As I dug deeper, I came across whispers of Tom's reclusive nature, neighbors recalling how he kept to himself, his rare smiles and polite nods the only glimpses into a man who seemed wrapped in layers of secrecy. What intrigued me most was a brief mention of his last job before he disappeared, renovating this very house and allegedly uncovering hidden compartments and secret spaces the previous owners had concealed, as if the house itself was guarding some buried truth. To get closer to the truth, I started knocking on doors in the neighborhood, seeking anyone who remembered Tom or the house before it fell into disrepair. Some neighbors were hesitant, casting wary glances over their shoulders as they spoke in hushed tones, their memories clouded with fear and suspicion. One elderly woman told me how Tom had been seen working late into the night, muttering to himself about things he shouldn't have touched. Another recalled strange visitors coming and going during the renovation, men whose faces she didn't recognize but whose presence unsettled the street. Each story I collected felt like pieces of a fractured puzzle, hinting at something darker lurking beneath the surface of everyday life here. The more I learned, the more it became clear that Tom's disappearance was no accident or simple misfortune. There were shadows cast by secrets that stretched beyond the boundaries of this old house, secrets Tom may have stumbled upon but was never meant to reveal. I found myself drawing parallels between the whispered stories and the locked room in the basement, imagining Tom working silently, uncovering truths buried in the dark, only to be silenced before he could share them. I couldn't help but feel a growing responsibility, a pull to carry on where Tom had left off, to peel back the layers of silence that had settled over this place for nearly 3 decades. The town's quiet acceptance of the mystery no longer felt like peace, but like a shallow veil covering a wound that refused to heal. I returned home each evening with my mind racing, the weight of what I was uncovering pressing on my shoulders. The house seemed to breathe around me, its walls holding secrets I was now determined to unearth. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, and that the past could hold dangers we hadn't yet imagined. But for Tom, for the truth, I had to keep going, no matter how deep the shadows stretched or how cold the silence grew. The day Mark called the locksmith was one I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, a mixture of hope and fear swirling in my chest like storm clouds ready to burst. When the locksmith arrived, his tools gleaming under the dim basement light, I felt the weight of every unanswered question pressing down on us both. His practiced hands worked patiently on the rusted lock, the clicking of his picks echoing like a metronome counting down to a truth long buried. Each twist and turn of the lock's mechanism sent a jolt through me, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment of revelation. When the door finally creaked open, it felt as if the air itself had shifted, releasing a stale, heavy scent that whispered of neglect and secrets kept too long. The room beyond was small, claustrophobic, barely more than a closet carved into the foundation, its walls scrawled with frantic messages and strange symbols that spoke of fear and desperation. The peeling paint revealed shaky handwriting etched into the plaster, words like help and trapped fading into the grime. There was an old mattress lying on the floor, stained and threadbare, its presence a stark contrast to the cold stone around it, as if someone had tried to carve out a fragile refuge within those confining walls. A candle stub, half burned and melted into a lump of wax, sat on a makeshift shelf, a flicker of light in a place designed for darkness. Mark and I exchanged glances, the unspoken understanding between us heavy and raw. This was no forgotten storage space or boiler access room. It was a prison, a chamber of silence that held the echoes of pain and captivity. I ran my fingers over the scrawled messages, tracing the desperate strokes that spoke of someone fighting to hold on to hope in a place designed to erase it. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows deepening, filling the room with a presence that felt both haunted and alive. The realization hit me like a blow. Tom had been here, or someone else had been locked in this suffocating space, left to survive on scraps of light and the flicker of a dying candle. My heart ached with the weight of what this meant, the horror of confinement so close, hidden beneath the house we were trying to bring back to life. As we stepped back into the basement, leaving the locked room behind us, I could feel the house exhaling, as if it had finally shared its secret. But with that release came a flood of questions. Who had been trapped here? Why? And how long had they suffered in silence? The room was a wound hidden in the heart of the house, and opening it was the first step toward uncovering a story far darker and more complicated than we had ever imagined. The locksmith packed up his tools, his usual calm replaced by a solemnity that matched our own. We locked the basement door behind us, but the locked room stayed open in my mind, its shadows stretching far beyond the stone walls, pulling me deeper into a mystery I was now bound to solve. Amid the dust and clutter that filled the tiny room behind the boiler, I found a rusted metal box tucked beneath the old mattress, its edges worn and corroded like a relic from another time, beckoning me to uncover the secrets it held. When I pried it open, the smell of damp paper and rust filled the air, and inside lay a collection of yellowed papers, photographs, and a leather-bound journal that immediately caught my attention. The cover was cracked and softened by age, the initials TM faintly embossed in the corner, Tom Mitchell's handwriting unmistakable even without the faded script. I spent hours hunched over that journal, each entry pulling me deeper into the mind of the man who had vanished all those years ago. Tom's words were raw and unfiltered, revealing a growing paranoia that gnawed at his usually steady spirit. He wrote about strange noises echoing through the house late at night, whispers that seemed to crawl along the walls, and footsteps that never belonged to him. There were passages filled with sleepless nights, the kind where shadows seemed to grow longer and darker, pressing in until they blur the line between reality and nightmare. What struck me most was the recurring mention of a shadowy figure who had visited during the renovation, someone Tom never dared name, but whose presence cast a long and chilling shadow over his days. This visitor demanded silence and secrecy, warning Tom to stop digging, to leave the hidden spaces alone. The tone in those pages shifted from curiosity to fear, as if Tom had realized too late that he was no longer in control of the story unfolding around him. His handwriting became more erratic, the ink blotting in places where his hand must have trembled with anxiety or dread. I could feel his isolation through the paper, a man trapped not just by physical walls, but by invisible chains of silence and threat. The journal revealed a man who had sensed he was being watched, who heard voices in the darkness that were not his own, and who was desperate for answers even as the walls seemed to close in. Reading his words, I felt the weight of the years pressing down, the echoes of a story that had been buried too deep for too long. I kept returning to a passage where Tom wrote about a hidden room, a place he stumbled upon that held things better left unseen, where he found proof of a secret so dangerous that it threatened everything and everyone involved. The final entries were fractured, almost pleading for understanding, a silent cry for someone to remember and seek justice. Closing the journal, I realized that Tom's disappearance was far from a mystery of chance or accident. It was a story of fear, power, and betrayal, etched into every page. The house had kept his secrets, but now I held the key in my hands, and I knew there was no turning back. The shadows of the past were stirring, and through Tom's words, They had finally begun to speak. As Mark and I delved deeper into the tangled history of the Mitchell house, the layers of its past began to unravel like a threadbare tapestry, revealing shadows darker and more complex than we had ever imagined. Late one evening, after hours spent sifting through property deeds and old newspaper archives, we stumbled upon a name that sent a chill crawling up my spine. The house's previous owner, a man named Vincent Harrow, whose reputation was whispered about in hushed tones across the county. Harrow was no ordinary businessman. He was rumored to have deep ties to organized crime, his name linked to illegal dealings, smuggling, and a web of corruption that had entangled the town for decades. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear that the house was not merely a victim of time, but a silent witness to darker deeds and dangerous secrets. I imagined Tom, with his steady hands and quiet demeanor, unknowingly stepping into a web woven by men who would kill to protect their interests. The thought was terrifying, that the meticulous handyman who had vanished so suddenly had stumbled upon something far beyond his skill set, something meant to remain buried beneath peeling paint and cracked plaster. It was as if the house itself was a vault, holding within its walls a story too dangerous to tell, a truth that had been guarded with ruthless determination. I pictured Tom working late into the night, uncovering hidden compartments and secret ledgers, his fingers tracing faded inscriptions that spoke of illicit transactions and betrayals. His journal entries suddenly made chilling sense. The shadowy figure who visited demanding silence could have been a messenger from Harrow's criminal network, a warning veiled in menace. The house, once a proud Victorian home, had become a fortress of fear and oppression, its history stained with blood and betrayal. The weight of this revelation pressed down on me like a storm cloud, thick and suffocating, as I grappled with the idea that Tom's fate was not an accident, but a deliberate act to silence a threat. Mark and I talked long into the night, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that stretched beyond our small town, reaching into the underbelly of crime and corruption. We realized that uncovering the truth would not only mean confronting the house's haunted past, but also risking the wrath of forces still lurking in the shadows, waiting to protect their secrets at any cost. The quiet neighborhood we had come to love suddenly felt fragile, as if the veneer of normalcy was cracking to reveal the darkness beneath. Yet despite the fear, I felt a fierce determination rising within me. For Tom, for the truth, we had to keep going. The house was no longer just an old building. It was a testament to courage and silence, and we were the ones who had to break that silence and shine a light into its deepest shadows. When I handed over Tom's journal and all the pieces we had gathered to the police, I didn't know what to expect. The case had been cold for so long, a file buried under layers of dust and neglect, its pages yellowed and forgotten like so many memories in that house. But something about the weight of our findings stirred the detectives into action. I watched as the lead detective, a sharp-eyed woman named Sergeant Morales, flipped through the journal with a mixture of disbelief and grim determination. Her team began reopening the investigation with fresh eyes, sifting through old reports and testimonies that had once been dismissed or overlooked. As they dug deeper, unsettling inconsistencies surfaced like ghosts rising from the shadows. Files were missing, key witness statements had been ignored or lost, and the narrative of Tom's disappearance unraveled to reveal gaps too large to be accidental. It was as if the original investigation had been rushed, or worse, deliberately compromised. I remembered the hushed conversations among neighbors and the strange silence that had surrounded the house for so many years, and suddenly it all felt like pieces of a larger, more sinister puzzle. The police found that some witnesses who had reported suspicious activity near the house had never been followed up on, their accounts written off as hearsay or forgotten in the bureaucratic shuffle. Even the forensic evidence from the initial search had been misplaced or never properly analyzed. It was infuriating to realize that Tom's disappearance had been treated with a casual indifference that robbed his family of justice for so long. Yet despite the frustration, there was a cautious hope blossoming among us, a chance to rewrite the story and bring to light the truths that had been buried in silence. Sergeant Morales told me that reopening the case was like peeling back layers of deception and neglect, and she promised they would pursue every lead, no matter where it took them. As the investigation gained momentum, I felt the house's past closing in around me, each new discovery casting longer shadows and raising more questions. I wondered who had wanted Tom gone so badly that the truth was buried beneath lost files and ignored voices. The thought chilled me to the core, but it also steeled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. I was fighting for Tom's story to be told properly, for the silence to be broken, and for the house to finally release its grip on the past. Sitting in that familiar room where we had found the journal, I felt a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that reopening the case meant stirring up forces that had long been content to hide in the dark. But I also knew that justice, no matter how delayed, was a light too strong to be extinguished forever. The shadows of doubt were lifting slowly, and with each step forward, I hoped we were closer to uncovering the truth that had haunted that house and the man who had vanished within its walls. One late evening, as the house settled into the kind of quiet that feels more like waiting than rest, my phone buzzed with a message that sent a chill creeping up my spine and settled heavy in my chest. The text was brief and chilling. Leave the past buried. No name, no number, just those 3 words that hung in the dark like a warning whispered from the shadows. I stared at the screen, the glow of the phone casting harsh light on my face, reflecting the storm of fear and defiance swirling inside me. I knew then that whatever I was uncovering was rattling cages far beyond what I had imagined, that the secrets hidden beneath the house were protected by people willing to threaten silence with shadows. The message felt like a crack in the fragile calm I had tried to maintain, a reminder that the past was not ready to be unearthed, that some truths were meant to stay buried deep and dark. But as fear gnawed at my resolve, a fierce determination burned stronger, pushing me forward instead of retreating into the safety of ignorance. I thought about Tom Mitchell, the man whose life had vanished into those walls, and the stories he had left behind in his journal, the warnings he could no longer speak aloud. This message was not just a threat. It was proof that I was close, that I was getting too close to something dangerous, something that others wanted to keep hidden no matter the cost. Mark tried to calm me, urging caution, reminding me that some stones are best left unturned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that backing down now would be a betrayal, not just to Tom, but to every unanswered question and every shadow waiting to be cast into the light. That night, I paced the creaking floors of the old house, the walls seeming to press in with silent expectation, and I promised myself I would not be cowed by threats or fear. The air felt thick with unspoken tension, and even the familiar groans of the settling house sounded like warnings echoing through the dark. I knew there would be more messages, more signs that I was stirring something powerful and dangerous. Yet with every pulse of fear, I found strength in the knowledge that the truth was worth any risk, that silence was no longer an option. I imagined Tom's hands, steady and sure, uncovering the secrets he had paid for with his freedom, and I vowed to carry his courage forward, to find the answers he never could. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, and though the night felt colder and the house more alive with secrets, I stood firm. This was not just a renovation or a mystery to solve, it was a reckoning. I would not let the past stay buried in darkness any longer. Whatever forces were watching and waiting, I was ready to face them head-on. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of dust and silence, and I was determined to bring it to light, no matter the cost to myself or the house that had become both my home and my burden. One afternoon, While Mark was outside tending to the garden, I found myself drawn to the porch of Mrs. Evelyn Turner, the elderly woman who had lived next door to the Mitchell house for over 50 years. Her weathered hands and sharp eyes had long been a fixture in the neighborhood, and I hoped she might shed some light on the shadows that hung over the old place. After a hesitant greeting, she invited me inside, her living room filled with faded photographs and the faint aroma of lavender and old paper. As she settled into her worn armchair, her voice trembled slightly as she began to recount memories that had been buried beneath layers of time and silence. She told me about a night in 1997 when the neighborhood was unusually quiet, and then, from the depths of that silence, she heard muffled screams that sent shivers down her spine. The sounds were so faint and distorted, as if someone was desperately trying to cry out but being silenced by unseen hands. She recalled stepping cautiously to her window, peering into the darkness just in time to see a dark-colored van parked near the Mitchell house, its engine idling like a predator waiting to pounce. What struck her most was the presence of the van itself, a vehicle unlike any she had seen in the quiet suburban streets, out of place and ominous. As she spoke, I felt the weight of her fear, a fear that had silenced her for years, locked away behind polite smiles and nods to neighbors. Then she shared a detail that caught me off guard, a memory of seeing Tom Mitchell arguing fiercely with a man I had never heard of just days before Tom vanished. Their voices had carried across the street, sharp and desperate, as if some dark secret had been laid bare in the open air. The man was tall and imposing, with a face obscured by shadows, and a presence that seemed to command fear. Mrs. Turner had watched as Tom's usual calm demeanor gave way to something fragile and panicked, a side of him no one else had ever witnessed. I listened, the room seeming to shrink around us, filled with the echoes of a conversation that had long been buried in the dust of the past. This neighbor's tale was not just a story but a key, unlocking a door I had not dared approach. It confirmed suspicions that Tom had been caught in a web of danger far beyond a simple handyman's work. As she finished, her eyes searched mine, perhaps seeking understanding or absolution for the years of silence. I felt a surge of gratitude and sorrow, knowing that her courage in speaking out was a beacon in the darkness that surrounded the house. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a clearer picture, one filled with threats, secrets, and a man trapped in a battle he could not win. Mrs. Turner's words lingered long after I left, a haunting melody that echoed through the halls of the Mitchell house, pushing me further into the heart of a mystery that refused to let go. One rainy afternoon, as the sky pressed low and grey against the windows of our kitchen, Mark and I sat huddled over an old laptop in a haze of exhaustion and desperation, scrolling through hours of grainy surveillance footage from a convenience store a few blocks from the Mitchell house, footage that had somehow been tucked away in the dusty archives of the local police department, but never properly reviewed. The flickering images were blurry and washed out, the kind of video that seemed more like shadows than pictures, but as we watched frame by frame, a figure emerged who sent a cold shiver tracing the length of my spine. There he was, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose features, even through the distortion, matched the descriptions we had heard whispered in the neighborhood for years. A local crime figure, someone whose name was spoken only in hushed tones and laden with fear, appeared to be lingering near the house around the time Tom vanished. The man moved with a casual menace, pausing at the corner of the street, glancing towards the house as if guarding it or waiting for something to happen. It was a haunting image, the way the dark coat blended into the shadows and the way his presence seemed to loom over the silent house like a storm ready to break. I felt the room shrink around me as the weight of that discovery settled in. A stark reminder that the danger we thought was buried with the past was very much alive and watching, waiting. Mark's jaw tightened as he leaned closer, pointing to another frame, where the same man appeared to speak with a figure who could have been Tom or someone else caught in the crosshairs of this silent battle. The idea that Tom had been tangled in a world far beyond our quiet neighborhood, in the grip of forces ruthless and merciless, made my heart ache with a mixture of dread and resolve. I pictured Tom's last days, the fear etched into his journal, the shadowy figure who had visited him, now made painfully real in this flickering footage. The walls of the house seemed to close in, echoing with secrets and threats that transcended time. I realized that this was no longer just about a missing man or a haunted house. It was about confronting a darkness that still cast its long shadow over us. There was no turning back now, no safety in ignorance. The images on the screen were a call to arms, a demand that we face whatever dangers lay ahead with open eyes and steady hearts. I felt a surge of anger and determination burning through the fear. Tom had been silenced, but I would not be. We would uncover the truth, no matter how deep the shadows ran or how fierce the resistance. The rain tapped steadily against the window, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart as we prepared to take the next step into the unknown. This was a reckoning, and we were ready to face it head-on. As the police investigation deepened, I watched with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction as the layers of deception surrounding the Mitchell house began to peel away, revealing a vast and intricate network of illegal activities hidden beneath the surface of our peaceful neighborhood. What once seemed like isolated whispers of suspicion now coalesced into a chilling truth, a web of smuggling, money laundering, and intimidation that had long thrived under the radar, masked by well-manicured lawns and friendly faces. Tom's journal and the new evidence we uncovered became the keys that unlocked this hidden world, shedding light on the dangerous undercurrents that had swept him away. I could almost see Tom piecing together fragments of the conspiracy during his renovation work, each discovery tightening the noose around him as he edged closer to truths some wanted buried forever. The authorities revealed how Tom's meticulous nature had led him to find ledgers and secret compartments where coded messages and illicit transactions had been concealed, evidence that pointed to powerful figures with far-reaching influence and ruthless intent. It became clear that the small, claustrophobic room behind the boiler where we found Tom's journal was not just a random prison, but a calculated trap, designed to silence him and keep the truth locked away from the world. As the investigation unfolded, the community was shaken to its core, struggling to reconcile the image of their quiet streets with the dark realities lurking beneath. Friends and neighbors, who had once seemed harmless, now appeared in a different light, their smiles and nods masking secrets and complicity. The police followed leads that connected local businesses, political figures, and criminal enforcers, uncovering a network that had used the neighborhood as a shield for their illicit operations. I felt a surge of empathy and sorrow for Tom, imagining the terror and isolation he must have faced, trapped in that tiny room, surrounded by shadows of betrayal. It was a stark reminder of the cost of truth in a world that too often favors silence over justice. Yet, amidst the darkness, I also sensed a spark of hope, a chance to bring light to the hidden corners and dismantle a system built on fear and corruption. The investigation became more than a search for answers. It was a battle for the soul of a community and the memory of a man who had paid the ultimate price for his courage. As Mark and I stood in the basement, the weight of what we had uncovered pressing down on us, I knew that the journey was far from over. The conspiracy was vast, and the forces we faced were determined to keep their secrets safe. But with each new revelation, I felt the walls of silence crumbling, the truth pushing its way into the light. The house no longer felt like a prison, but a battleground, where the fight for justice was being waged quietly but relentlessly. For Tom, for the neighborhood, and for the future, I vowed to see it through to the end, no matter the cost or the shadows that lay ahead. with the police now fully engaged and the investigation unfolding like the pages of a long-forgotten book. The day we discovered Tom alive felt like a surreal turning point that I had only dared to imagine in the darkest corners of my mind. It was Mark who first noticed movement in the tiny padlocked room behind the boiler when the officers finally forced the door open after days of planning and preparation. The air that greeted us was thick with dust and the stale scent of neglect, but there, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure curled on the threadbare mattress, a man so frail and hollowed by time that my breath caught in my throat. Tom Mitchell, the handyman who had vanished without a trace 27 years ago, was alive, but barely. His eyes, sunken and haunted, flickered with a mixture of relief and disbelief as he was gently lifted from the room that had been his prison, a tomb of silence and darkness that had swallowed his youth and stolen his freedom. The hospital stay that followed revealed just how harrowing his captivity had been. Years confined in that claustrophobic space, surviving on scraps and the flickering flame of a candle, each day blurring into the next in a nightmare of isolation. As Tom began to speak, his voice was a fragile thread weaving a tapestry of betrayal and fear that had kept him silent for decades. He told us about the men who had kidnapped him, about the shadowy network that had hunted him for uncovering their secrets hidden deep within the walls of the house. The warnings, the threats, the brutal beatings when he tried to speak out. They were all etched into his trembling hands and haunted gaze. Tom's story was one of resilience amid unspeakable cruelty, a testament to the human spirit's stubborn refusal to be broken. He explained how he had tried to send messages, how he had carved words into the walls of that tiny room, hoping someone would find them, that someone would come. But fear had silenced the world outside, and the house had become a tomb not just for Tom, but for the truth. As I listened, I felt the weight of years of silence and sorrow lift, replaced by a fierce determination to ensure that his ordeal would not be forgotten or repeated. The community around us began to rally, shock and empathy mixing in equal measure as neighbors who had lived alongside the mystery for decades grappled with the reality of Tom's survival and suffering. His return was not just a rescue but a reckoning, shining a light into the darkest corners of the past and demanding accountability. Mark held my hand as I sat beside Tom in the hospital room, the fragile man who had endured so much now entrusted to our care and to the justice we sought. The journey ahead would be long and painful, filled with healing and confronting those who had sought to bury the truth. But in that moment, as Tom's eyes met mine and a faint spark of hope flickered within them, I knew that the silence had finally been broken. The house that had held so many secrets had begun to release its grip, and with Tom's courage and our resolve, we would see the story through to its bitter and necessary end. After the shocking revelation of Tom's survival and the harrowing details of his captivity came to light, the wheels of justice began to turn with a force that shook the very foundations of our small community. The arrest of those responsible, men and women who had wielded power through fear and deception, was both a relief and a bitter reminder of the darkness that had festered so close to home for so long. I watched as the news spread like wildfire, igniting conversations once buried beneath polite smiles and guarded silence, forcing neighbors and friends to confront the ugly truths that had been hidden in plain sight. The community was fractured, wrestling with feelings of betrayal and grief as old wounds reopened, and the weight of years of silence pressed down on us all. Yet amid the sorrow and anger, I sensed a quiet resilience beginning to take root, a shared determination to heal and rebuild from the shadows of the past. Tom's journey toward recovery was slow and painful, both physically and emotionally. The years locked away in that tiny room had taken a terrible toll on his body, but the scars etched deeper into his spirit were the hardest to face. Mark and I became his steadfast companions through every step of that long road, offering support and strength when his own faltered. Friends and family rallied around him, their love and patience weaving a safety net beneath the fragile threads of his newfound freedom. I remember the first time Tom smiled with genuine warmth, a flicker of the man he once was, shining through the haze of trauma. It was a moment of hope that felt like the dawn breaking after the longest night. Together, we navigated the difficult terrain of therapy sessions, medical treatments, and the slow rebuilding of trust, not just in others, but in a world that had so cruelly turned its back on him. The trial of the captors was a public reckoning, exposing the depths of the conspiracy and the lengths to which some had gone to maintain their silence. The courtroom was filled with tension and raw emotion as survivors and families testified, their voices a powerful chorus demanding justice and closure. It was a painful but necessary process, a turning point where truth triumphed over fear and deception. As the verdicts were read and sentences handed down, a sense of closure began to settle over the community, fragile but real. The house on Maple Street, once a symbol of mystery and loss, became a beacon of resilience and courage. For me, Mark, and everyone who had fought for the truth, the journey was far from over. But the path forward was clearer now, lit by the hard-won light of justice. Healing would take time, and the scars of the past would never fully fade. But together, we faced the future with hope, determined to honor Tom's strength and the memory of those who had been lost. The house no longer held secrets in silence. It stood as a testament to survival, truth, and the enduring power of community to overcome even the darkest of shadows. The day we decided to host a small gathering at the Mitchell house was one I had dreamed of quietly, but never dared to believe would come. A day when the weight of shadows that had long clung to those weathered walls could finally lift, replaced by light, laughter, and the kind of peace that only truth and survival can bring. Friends, neighbors, and those who had been part of Tom's story gathered in the freshly restored living room, the air filled with the soft hum of conversation and tentative smiles that spoke of healing and new beginnings. The house, once a prison of secrets and fear, now breathed with a gentle warmth, its rooms echoing with memories of courage and resilience rather than silence and sorrow. Mark stood beside me, his hand steady in mine, as we welcomed everyone, feeling the extraordinary shift from haunted past to hopeful future in every glance and every embrace. Tom, looking stronger and more at peace than I had ever seen him, shared his journey, not just the pain and captivity, but the strength he had found in reclaiming his life and helping others who had been silenced by injustice. His words carried a quiet power, a beacon for those still trapped in their own dark corners, and his presence was a living testament to the triumph of spirit over shadow. As I watched him speak, I felt the house itself seem to pulse with a renewed heartbeat, as if it too had been reborn alongside him and all of us who had fought so hard for the truth. The garden outside, once wild and overgrown, now bloomed with flowers carefully tended by Mark and the neighbors, each petal a symbol of growth and renewal, a stark contrast to the tangled vines that had once threatened to consume the place. I walked through the rooms, tracing my fingers over the smooth walls, remembering the days when those same surfaces had held messages of fear and desperation, and marveled at the transformation, not just of the house, but of the lives it touched. Conversations drifted to plans for the future, how the house might serve as a sanctuary for those seeking truth, a place where stories like Tom's could be heard and justice pursued. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined us. They were the foundation on which hope was built. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow through the windows, I felt a profound sense of closure settle over me, mingling with the promise of a new dawn. The house stood tall and proud, no longer a symbol of fear, but of resilience, a silent witness to the power of courage and community to overcome even the darkest of histories. As the last guests left and Mark and I sat together in the quiet aftermath, I knew that this was not the end of our journey, but the beginning of a chapter filled with light, healing, and unwavering hope. The past had been faced, the truth unveiled, and in its place was a future bright with possibility, a future where the Mitchell house would stand not as a relic of sorrow, but as a beacon for those who dare to seek the truth and find strength in survival.